In a world where power is often measured by economic and military strength, Ibrahim Traoré, the young, tenacious president of Burkina Faso, dared to challenge that order. When he was summoned to a U.S. federal court, it seemed like a mere formality, a staged performance to humiliate an African leader, but everything turned upside down. An arrogant U.S. judge mocked Ibrahim Traoré, believing she was dealing with an inexperienced, easily subdued man. But to the world's astonishment, Traoré not only stood his ground, but transformed the courtroom dock into a platform for exposing the truth, revealing the cracks in a system presumed to be just. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. The federal courtroom in Washington, D.C., that night was not just a space for justice, it was a stage illuminated by the flashing lights of reporters, where international diplomats and a curious public filled every seat. Judge Victoria Caldwell, sitting upright in her high chair, her face cold and authoritative, lightly tapped her wooden gavel to signal the start of the trial. The sharp, decisive sound cut through the tense atmosphere, her voice echoed through the room, carrying an inherent air of superiority. "We will not waste time. Mr. Ibrahim Traoré, please step forward." In her eyes, this was just another typical African dictator case, one of those who would fumble, falter, or attempt to justify themselves with illogical arguments, only to submit to the verdict of international justice. She had seen it too many times. Traoré stepped to the dock, standing tall. His face showed no emotion, like a bronze statue. The flashes from reporters' cameras erupted incessantly, making the room flicker, but he stood there, unmoved. "Mr. Ibrahim Traoré," Judge Victoria Caldwell, her tone sharp as a blade, said, "you have been summoned to this court to face serious charges related to destabilizing the region, blatantly violating international investment treaties, and obstructing global humanitarian operations." She paused, scanning the room, then continued, each word laced with intent to belittle and mock. "A self-proclaimed president at just 36 years old, who seized power by force, tearing up international treaties like scraps of paper. Can you even comprehend the concepts of law and order we are discussing here?" She smirked, her gaze sweeping over Traoré's simple military uniform as if looking at something outdated and out of place. "Or perhaps your actions are merely the manifestation of inexperience, the recklessness of someone who has never truly governed a modern nation." "With your limited experience in managing a modern nation," Caldwell pressed on, "you hastily expelled foreign military forces internationally recognized as stabilizing factors, ensuring security in the Sahel region. Can you explain how this action has not destabilized the region and not facilitated the growth of terrorist groups?" Traoré remained remarkably calm. He took a deep breath, his voice resonating through the room, clear, strong, and without a hint of tremor. "Your Honor," he began, "first, I am not a self-proclaimed president. I am the interim president of Burkina Faso, entrusted by my people with the responsibility at a time when our nation stood on the brink of collapse. Second, I am not here to be judged for how I lead my country, but to clarify the truth about what has been and is still happening." He paused, his gaze sharp as a dagger, sweeping over Thorne, then up to Judge Caldwell. "Regarding the expulsion of foreign military forces, Your Honor calls them stabilizing factors. So I ask you, ma'am, what kind of stability is it when thousands of my people are slaughtered daily, when villages are burned, when children live in constant fear? What kind of stability is it when your forces are present in my country, but cannot protect my people from terrorists less than 20 kilometers from their bases?" A heavy silence enveloped the room. Thorne stood there, no longer smirking. He expected a generic defense, an evasion, but Traoré did no such thing. He nodded slightly toward a court assistant, who promptly displayed an image on the large screen behind. It was a grainy but haunting photo, a devastated village, thatched roofs half burned, smoke still rising from the rubble, and in the center, the small, lifeless bodies of slaughtered children. The courtroom stirred noticeably. impossibly, with soft gasps echoing. Some reporters hurriedly scribbled, their faces showing shock and disbelief. "This is Tinnikov, a village less than 20 kilometers from your military base," Traore said, his voice lowering, heavy with pain but resolute. "The massacre happened last March. 46 innocent civilians were killed. When the people ran to your forces for help, what was the response? Silence, excuses about operational protocols and jurisdictional boundaries. So, Your Honor, where is the responsibility of a stabilizing force when they cannot protect the people they claim to defend?" He hadn't expected a man he deemed inexperienced to do this. He glanced at the photo, then at Traore, his eyes betraying slight unease, searching for a retort. Judge Caldwell furrowed her brow, staring at the image. She had never seen such a raw, heartbreaking image in a legal trial like this. It wasn't part of the script she and the system had anticipated. After the foreign forces left, Traore continued, his voice growing stronger like a powerful declaration. "We replaced them with our own military and civilian volunteers. We trained them, equipped them with what we could, and most importantly, we gave them a reason to fight, to protect their own families, their own land. In the past 6 months, terrorist attacks in Burkina Faso have decreased by 60%. The courtroom seemed jolted. The figure 60% rang like thunder, shattering entrenched biases. Murmurs spread through the room, louder than before. Some reporters scribbled frantically, pens flying across paper. Thorne swallowed hard, his smugness completely gone. He looked down at his documents, searching for a loophole. His destabilization argument had been ruthlessly dismantled by facts and figures. At that moment, Judge Caldwell banged her gavel sharply. "Enough," she declared, her voice icy, her gaze fixed on Traore. "Defendant, focus on the specific charges regarding your violation of international treaties and investment laws. This is a court of law, not a political forum for you to present unverified figures or emotional stories." Traore looked directly at Caldwell, his gaze unwavering. "Your Honor," he replied, his voice still calm but commanding, "these unverified figures and emotional stories are the heart of the matter. An international treaty, as you call it, if it legitimizes the exploitation and killing of my people, is it still law in any true sense? I am speaking about the truth of my people, Your Honor, and truth sometimes is more powerful than any law on paper." Judge Caldwell gripped the armrests of her chair tightly. She had never had a defendant dare to challenge the essence of the law in her courtroom like this. Her face briefly showed anger, but she restrained herself, unwilling to reveal a loss of control. Thorne, quickly regaining composure, tried to shift gears. "So to compensate for the security shortfall you caused, you sought new military partners, Mr. Traore, particularly Russia, Iran and Turkey. Don't you see these relationships as dangerous to regional and global security when these nations have no shared commitment to democracy and human rights like Western allies?" Traore responded slowly, his gaze steady. "Mr. Prosecutor, Burkina Faso is a sovereign nation. We have the right to choose partners based on the interests of our people, not on the political or ideological demands you impose. We sought military training and security cooperation with nations willing to help us, without demanding control over our resources or dictating our policies. The issue isn't the presence of foreigners, sir. It's who decides the terms of their presence. We are not seeking new masters, we are seeking true partners." Western supporters in the room initially seemed uneasy, but they couldn't deny the logic in Traore's argument. Murmurs rose again. Judge Caldwell rubbed her temple. She was accustomed to lengthy defenses, but Traore's sharp, direct words forced her to think. Thorne pressed harder. "And you went further by forming the Alliance of Sahel States AES with Mali and Niger. Isn't this a secessionist bloc, a direct challenge to existing regional organizations and international cooperation efforts? A coalition formed to oppose Western influence, isn't it?" Traore looked directly at Thorne, his expression stern. "The AES was not formed to oppose anyone, Mr. Prosecutor. It was formed to protect our interests. For decades, Sahel nations have been divided, weakened, exploited. We realized we must unite to defend ourselves, to determine our own destiny. This alliance is a statement of sovereignty, of economic and security autonomy for the Sahel people. It's a step toward a united, self-reliant Africa, where our voices are heard, not controlled. In Thorne's eyes, the initial smugness was gone, replaced by clear anxiety. He glanced at Judge Caldwell for support, but she was staring at Traore with intense focus, as if discovering something new. Thorne realized Traore was not a simple man he could easily mock or manipulate. He was facing a sharp intellect, a resolve forged from his nation's suffering. Judge Caldwell looked at Thorne. She saw the growing loss of control on her prosecutor's face. She tapped her gavel lightly, a reminder that had little effect. The audience, especially international reporters, began scribbling furiously. This was a confrontation unlike any they had witnessed. The murmurs grew louder, now filled with astonishment, not the initial glee. Thorne cleared his throat, trying to regain confidence. "Very well," he said, his voice slightly strained. "If security isn't the issue, let's talk about economics. Your cancellation of numerous mining contracts with Western corporations, particularly gold and uranium mines, isn't that asset seizure, a blatant violation of international investment law, causing billions in losses for legitimate investors?" Traore had anticipated this question. He took a small step forward, his gaze sweeping the room, lingering on the reporters fixated on him. "Mr. Prosecutor," he said, his tone shifting from rebuttal to a steely accusation, "you call it asset seizure and violation of international law. We call it correcting a historical injustice." He paused, letting his words sink into the air. The courtroom held its breath, waiting. "Let me show you what the international law you defend looks like," Traore continued, his voice resonant, clear, and commanding. "For decades, Western corporations signed mining contracts in our country. Take, for example, the Yuga gold mine, one of Burkina Faso's largest. Under a contract signed by the previous government, a foreign corporation was allowed to take 92% of the profits from the mined gold. The remaining 8%, meant for the people of Burkina Faso, was often lost to corruption and vague terms. That he signaled, and another slide appeared, a simple pie chart, split into two unequal parts, a tiny red slice, 8%, and a massive green one, 92%. The chart, so straightforward anyone could grasp the injustice, sparked a strong wave of murmurs. 8%, Mr. Prosecutor, Traore repeated, emphasizing each word, his gaze piercing Thorne. "While our land is eroded, our water poisoned by toxic chemicals, chemicals you've banned in your own countries. So, who is violating basic ethical principles? Who is seizing? Who is causing harm?" The murmurs erupted louder. Some in the audience began shaking their heads, their faces unable to hide their shock. Judge Caldwell's expression showed clear discomfort as these raw truths were exposed. Truths entirely beyond her control and expectations. "Did you know, Mr. Prosecutor, about a luxurious villa in Monaco, worth tens of millions of dollars, bought with incentives to secure the Yuga mining contract?" Traore asked, his gaze unrelenting. "That money should have built schools, hospitals, or provided clean water for my people. We are not seizing, we are reclaiming what is ours, what was legally stolen under the guise of international investment. We are correcting, not destroying the law." His eyes panicked, glancing at his assistant, Lauren Hayes, with desperation. Hayes could only shake her head, unable to find a rebuttal in their thick files. Traore's words weren't theories, they were verifiable. Specific truths, presented with terrifying clarity and logic. Thorne cleared his throat, trying to regain some control. He needed another angle, something less tied to raw facts. "Mr. Traore," he said, his voice strained, "let's talk about how you've obstructed international humanitarian organizations operating in your country. NGOs have worked tirelessly to provide medical aid, food and education. By imposing harsh regulations and expelling staff, haven't you endangered the lives of millions of impoverished people in urgent need?" Traore gave a faint, humorless smile, weary but knowing. "Ah, humanitarian organizations. Another interesting story, Mr. Prosecutor." He paused, his gaze turning to the crowd, as if speaking directly to his people, not the court. You say they provide medical aid, food and education, but what's the reality? We have humanitarian organizations spending 60% of their budgets on administrative costs and salaries for foreign staff. These experts live in luxurious villas, drive expensive cars, while my people sleep in tattered huts and walk miles for water. He signaled again, and another slide appeared, images of lavish NGO villas in an isolated Ouagadougou area, contrasted with the ramshackle huts of locals. The stark contrast hit the courtroom like a bucket of cold water. You send us food, but buy from foreign suppliers, undermining our local agriculture. Traore continued, his voice not angry but full of frustration. You talk about education but don't transfer technology or train locals to build and manage. We need sustainable solutions, not temporary aid that creates dependency and waste. We need bread, sir, not a fleet of luxury managers and meaningless efficiency reports that exist only on paper. Some in the back shouted, exactly in hushed tones. Thorne, now not just unsettled but panicked, glanced at Judge Caldwell for help, but she stared at Traore with an unreadable expression, shock, irritation and a hint of realization. At this point, Traore raised his head high, his gaze sweeping the room, lingering on Thorne, then Caldwell, and finally the media. His voice rang out, not as a defense but as a final challenge, like thunder striking the conscience of everyone present. Mr. Prosecutor, Traore said, each word heavy, you accuse me of destabilization, of violating the law. Then I ask you, who has destabilized for decades by stealing resources, propping up corrupt dictators for easy manipulation, and causing extreme poverty for my people? Who created a system where law legitimizes exploitation and humanitarianism masks control? He slowly raised his hand, clenching the air as if grasping something intangible. You summoned me here for a show trial, to judge me, to teach me a lesson, but I tell you, he said, his voice so powerful it needed no microphone, this trial is not about judging me. This trial is a mirror reflecting what you have done to my country, to Africa. It reflects your own conscience. Traore's words struck the courtroom like a bomb. No more whispers, no more scratching pencils. The room fell deathly silent, save for the ragged breaths of a few. Nathaniel Thorne stood there, utterly pale. The arrogance had vanished completely from his face, replaced by panic and abject defeat. He knew he had lost. He couldn't counter anything Traore had said, for it was all true, raw and painful. Judge Victoria Caldwell, after a moment of stunned silence, briefly closed her eyes, then opened them. She stared at Traore, a deep discomfort etched on her face. She was accustomed to wielding power in every trial, but now she felt judged by the man before her. He had completely turned the tables. Thorne, stammering, unable to form coherent words, turned to Judge Caldwell. Judge Caldwell looked at him, her gaze a mix of disappointment in Thorne and astonishment at Traore. She couldn't refuse. Continuing the trial now would only further expose the prosecution's failure. She banged her gavel, this time harder, more decisively. The court is in recess, she declared, her voice still controlled, but her eyes betraying profound shock and disappointment. Reporters who had tried to maintain professionalism now scrambled for their phones, talking loudly. Cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing Ibrahim Traoré still standing tall at the dock, his gaze resolute, a monument unshaken by the chaos around him. No one remembered Thorne's initial mockery or Caldwell's indifference. All had been replaced by awe, even admiration. Immediately, videos of Traoré's testimony, especially the moments where he exposed the true nature of legal contracts and the wastefulness of aid, were uploaded to social media and spread like wildfire. Within hours, hashtags like Traore Truth, Africa Rising, and The Real Trial trended globally. The hashtag Tinnikov exploded, bringing the story of the massacred village to millions who had never known it existed. Articles and analyses of the confrontation flooded media platforms, bypassing usual censorship barriers. Global public opinion erupted. In many African capitals, spontaneous protests broke out, not just in support of Traoré but as a collective cry for justice and sovereignty across the continent. From Dakar to Johannesburg, Cairo to Lagos, people poured into the streets, raising banners with Traoré's image and bold messages of autonomy. Young people in Western nations, raised in an information age with access to diverse perspectives, began questioning what they'd been taught about international relations and humanitarian aid. Universities and online forums buzzed with debates about neo-colonialism and the right to self-determination. In the days following the trial's recess, Nathaniel Thorne lived a nightmare. He locked himself in his office, the desk lamp glaring over scattered documents. Every figure, every contract clause Traoré had cited haunted him. He had believed in the system, in its justice, but Traoré's words had torn into that foundation. Thorne scrolled through his phone, reading comments from around the world. They didn't just criticize him or the government, they exposed the lies and injustices he, as a prosecutor, had helped perpetuate. Shame and anger, not at Traoré, but at himself and the system, grew. He realized his initial smirk wasn't just contempt, it was ignorance and blindness. Thorne had always viewed the world through the lens of power and interests, but Traoré had forced him to face the raw truth of the oppressed. For Judge Victoria Caldwell, the shift in her perspective was subtler, but no less profound. She had spent her life in the world of law and order, fully trusting the legitimacy of the system she served. She had handled countless cases involving developing nations, always seeing herself as a champion of justice, but Traoré didn't play by her rules. He didn't argue about laws, he argued about morality, conscience, and undeniable truths she had overlooked or never truly seen. She rewatched the trial footage, particularly the moment Traoré presented the Tinikoff photo and the 92.8% chart. The initial discomfort on her face gave way to deep reflection. She began to wonder, had she missed something? Was the justice she believed in truly fair for all? She realized Traoré wasn't a reckless fool, but a sharp intellect, a visionary leader who forced her to confront uncomfortable questions about her role and the system she represented. Days later, shocking news rocked the U.S. legal and political spheres. Prosecutor Nathaniel Thorne had resigned from the Justice Department. The decision stunned everyone. No one knew the real reason. Publicly, Thorne cited personal reasons, but those close to him knew it stemmed from what happened in the trial with Ibrahim Traoré. Thorne, a man who built his career crushing opponents, had crushed himself as an act of redemption and awakening. His smugness was gone, replaced by an unusual humility. This was a profound personal transformation, an unforeseen outcome of that seemingly straightforward trial. Judge Caldwell, upon hearing of Thorne's resignation, sighed softly. She understood. She knew what happened in that courtroom wasn't just a trial, but an event that shifted perspectives, including her own and Thorne's. After the trial's recess and the wildfire spread of Thorne's resignation, Ibrahim Traoré chose to return to Burkina Faso. He didn't linger in Washington to savor his moral victory or entertain sudden offers from international organizations. His mission wasn't over. His country still awaited him. Traoré's flight landed at Ouagadougou International Airport on a blazing afternoon, but it wasn't an ordinary arrival. From the air, Traoré could see endless streams of people converging on the airport. Thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, had gathered since early morning. They weren't just from the capital. They were caravans from every corner of the country, from the remotest villages, overcoming hardships to be there. As the plane's door opened, cheers erupted like thunder. It wasn't the roar of a typical frenzied crowd, but the bellow of a nation long suppressed, now unleashed by fierce pride. Millions of eyes turned to him, filled with admiration, respect, and love. Burkina Faso's flags fluttered everywhere, interspersed with the green, yellow, and red flags of the newly formed alliance of Sahel states, AES, symbols of unity and autonomy. Traoré stepped off the plane in his familiar, simple khaki uniform. His face remained calm, but his eyes gleamed with indescribable emotion at the sea of people before him. He wasn't a distant politician, he was a son of this land, who had dared to stand for them. Security forces struggled to maintain distance, but the crowd pressed forward, reaching out, wanting to touch him, to express gratitude. Chants of IB echoed, mingling with traditional songs and vibrant drum beats. No grand podium was needed. A simple pickup truck, hastily decorated with flags and flowers, sufficed. Traore stood on it, microphone in hand, his gaze sweeping over the eager crowd. The air hushed, a reverent silence, as if each person wanted to absorb his every word into their soul. "My brothers, my sisters, my children of Burkina Faso," his voice boomed, warm yet commanding. "I return not as a victor in some foreign legal battle. I return as a son of this nation, carrying the truth, your voices, and faith in ourselves." He paused, letting the applause and cheers erupt again. "They summoned me to judge our actions. They tried to humiliate us before the world, but we turned that trial into a platform, exposing long-hidden truths. We showed them Burkina Faso is no longer a weak, manipulable nation. We are a resilient people, with will and the right to determine our own destiny." He emphasized, "We will not back down. We will continue the path of independence, of autonomy. We will build our nation with our own hands, harnessing our resources for our people's benefit. We will not accept aid tied to control, nor cooperation tied to exploitation." Traore's speech wasn't long, but every word was a spark igniting hope and resolve in the people's hearts. He wasn't just a leader, he was a symbol, a source of pride. He affirmed the path of independence, autonomy, and African unity. He called for solidarity, for rebuilding the nation with the people's own hands. The echo of Traore's speech didn't stop in Burkina Faso, it reverberated across Africa. The Alliance of Sahel States, AE, solidified its stance, becoming a model for other African nations seeking similar paths. They began re-evaluating their agreements with the West, seeking true partners based on respect and mutual benefit. The Washington confrontation wasn't just one man's victory, it was a turning point, a signal for a new era in Africa. Months after the seismic Washington trial, while Ibrahim Traoré tirelessly rebuilt his nation and became a beacon of hope for millions across Africa, a profound transformation unfolded elsewhere. Nathaniel Thorne, the former U.S. prosecutor who once embodied the system's arrogance and smugness, was now a changed man. His resignation had shocked many, but only those closest knew it wasn't surrender but a new beginning. In the days after the trial, Thorne grappled with Traoré's words. They weren't mere accusations but raw, searing truths that tore into the beliefs he'd built his life upon. He had spent his career defending so-called international law and global order, but Traoré showed that for many those were facades for injustice and exploitation. Thorne couldn't sleep. The image of Tinikoff, the 92.8% chart, and his own initial smirk haunted him. He realized he had been a tool in a machine he never truly understood, one that crushed the will and resources of other nations under the guise of development and security. Shame and a newfound sense of responsibility drove Thorne. He needed to face the man who changed his life. He wanted to understand, not as a prosecutor but as a human. After discreet efforts through unofficial channels, Thorne received a brief message from Traoré's office. "President Traoré will meet you in Ouagadougou." Thorne's trip to Burkina Faso was unlike his preconceptions of Africa. No dry aid reports or military operation briefs. Instead, he saw resilient people, budding construction projects, and a fierce belief in the future. The meeting took place in a modest office in Ouagadougou's presidential palace. As Thorne entered, Traoré sat at his desk, his gaze as calm as their last encounter. No resentment or reproach. Thorne bowed his head, heavy with emotion. "President Traoré," Thorne began, his voice trembling slightly, "I'm not here as a prosecutor. I'm here to apologize. I was wrong. I was blinded by what I was taught, by the interests I unknowingly served. Your words in that trial, they woke me up." Traoré looked at him, not interrupting. He nodded slightly. "Sit, Prosecutor Thorne, you don't need to apologize to me. You need to be honest with yourself, and I believe you are. The conversation lasted hours. Thorne didn't just share his awakening, he listened. Traoré spoke of his vision for Burkina Faso and Africa, a vision of autonomy, unity, and using their resources for their people's benefit. He didn't talk of revenge or hatred, but of building a fairer future. He spoke of his nation's pain, of ravaged villages, of wasteful aid programs, yet his voice held no bitterness, only remarkable resolve. The world I was taught isn't the one I see here, Thorne said, his eyes on Traoré with deep respect. You showed me a raw truth, and I can't go back to being who I was. The meeting solidified Thorne's transformation. Back in the US, he abandoned traditional legal paths. No longer the prosecutor representing power, he became a law professor, focusing on equitable international law, global justice, and the sovereignty of developing nations. He wrote books, gave lectures, and used his influence to expose the injustices he once upheld. Though he never publicly detailed his meeting with Traoré, Thorne's life became a testament to the power of truth and the impact of a principled individual. From a mocker, he became a student, a quiet advocate for the oppressed. Years passed since the earth-shaking Washington trial. Ibrahim Traoré, now officially elected president of Burkina Faso with an overwhelming majority, relentlessly pursued his vision. Under his leadership, Burkina Faso and AES members made remarkable strides in rebuilding and asserting sovereignty. Nationalized mines generated vast revenue, invested directly into healthcare, education, and infrastructure. Self-sufficient agriculture projects flourished, significantly reducing reliance on foreign aid. Burkina Faso's better-equipped and trained military successfully repelled terrorist groups, restoring peace to once ravaged lands. Traoré's influence wasn't confined to the region. He became a leading voice for African autonomy globally. On a radiant October day in New York, President Ibrahim Traoré stood at the UN General Assembly podium. It was a historic moment. No longer in a courtroom's dock, he was on a global stage where all voices could be heard. His speech wasn't threatening or harshly critical, but a compelling call for a fairer world order. He spoke not of overthrowing but of building a more balanced world. "We don't seek new enemies," Traoré began, his voice resonating through the hall, "but true partners. We don't ask for charity, but demand respect. We don't want unconditional aid. We need technology transfers, opportunities to build our own future. The world must understand that a nation's sovereignty isn't a privilege, but an inalienable right. A people's interests cannot be traded for unfair contracts or imposed political conditions." He described the AS not as a bloc against others, but as a union to empower millions once forgotten. He said Africa isn't a playground for resource extraction or a testing ground for distant policies, but a continent rich in potential and culture, with people deserving to live in freedom and dignity. As Traoré concluded, the hall fell silent for a moment, then erupted in thunderous applause. Over half the world's nations stood, clapping fervently, a rare sight at the General Assembly. It wasn't just praise for an eloquent speech, but agreement with a vision of justice, equality, and self-determination. Among those watching the speech on television, in a quiet suburban New York apartment, was retired Judge Victoria Caldwell. She brewed a cup of hot tea and settled into her familiar armchair. Her face no longer bore the stern coldness, but a thoughtful calm. She followed Traoré's every gesture and word on the screen. A young journalist, Evelyn Reed, who had been at the trial years ago, visited Caldwell for a special article interview. "Judge Caldwell," Evelyn asked, "do you think the trial with President Traoré was a mistake?" Caldwell smiled faintly, an enigmatic smile. "I don't think it was a mistake, Evelyn," she said, her voice warm. "I think it revealed truths that needed revealing, just not what we expected." She sipped her tea. "We went there to judge him, but perhaps," she said, her gaze distant, "he was the one judging us." Caldwell stood, walking to the window. "The court of global public opinion will render its own verdict," she added, "and those verdicts, unlike ours, tend to endure forever." Outside the United Nations building, a light drizzle fell over New York City. Digital billboards in Times Square flickered with headlines about economic forecasts and celebrity gossip. Life continued its usual rhythm. But in government offices and university lecture halls, in community centers and online forums, a dialogue persisted. A dialogue that began in a Washington courtroom when a young leader refused to play the role assigned to him. Ibrahim Traoré entered history not because he seized power, but because he spoke truth to power. Not just for his nation, but for every people yearning to write their own story. A trial meant to make him bow instead exalted him. His legacy is not only the policies that transformed Burkina Faso, but the voice of resilience, of dignity, of an Africa rising, asserting its place on the global stage. It is a new future, where justice is not just law but true fairness for all. The story of Ibrahim Traoré is not just a hymn to courage, it is the mirror reflecting the challenges of truth and justice in modern American society. Though we are not in an international courtroom, the lessons of questioning, speaking out, and the capacity for change remain profoundly relevant. Consider how prosecutor Thorne, initially arrogant, was gradually shaken by the raw truths of the 92.8% mining profit chart and the lavish NGO villas. This reminds us in the United States not to readily accept simplified narratives from media or politicians. Always seek the hidden truth, dig into the details, whether about policy, economics, or media campaigns. Thorne's awakening proves that even the most steadfast believers in a system can change when faced with undeniable evidence. It urges us to stay vigilant and keep learning. Second, Traoré's solitary stand against a powerful system, using the image of the massacred Tinikoff village to counter security arguments, testifies to the power of an individual voice. In a multifaceted society like the United States, where information can be manipulated, courageously speaking truth, whether in workplaces, communities, or on social media, is vital. Don't hesitate to express evidence-based views, even if they go against the majority. Truth, as Traoré showed, can shift perceptions. Finally, Thorne's transformation from a smug prosecutor to a quiet advocate for justice is a lesson in redemption and personal change. When recognizing one's own or the system's errors, it's crucial to have the courage to alter actions and attitudes. Not everyone can change careers, but adjusting perspectives, behaviors, or engaging in more meaningful actions after an awakening is a practical lesson for every American. The story encourages us not just to accept flaws, but to strive to be part of the solution, seeking and spreading truth, no matter how hard it is to face. Thank you for joining us in exploring this story of courage and revealed truth. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to stay updated on more profound stories about the pursuit of justice and sovereignty for nations. See you next time.